It makes so much sense now, even why we struggled for so long to even figure out what was going on with him. Even though there are these deficits over here, there are these amazing superpowers that come with it. And that's a beautiful thing. It's Amanda with Eat, Pray, Crunch, and welcome to part 2 of this little series that I am doing on my son's diagnosis. And that is exactly what I am talking about in this video. If you have not seen part 1, I strongly encourage you to go watch that video. I will link it here in the cards because that gives the whole history of my son's development, what has kind of brought us to this point now, and how he received the diagnosis that he has now. So if you haven't seen that video, go watch that first and pause this one and then come back and watch this one because it'll make a lot more sense. Anyway, I left off just telling the story about all of his behaviors from birth until now. He's 5. So all throughout that time, since he was first showing signs of giftedness, like I said in my other video, that wasn't something that was on my radar when he was a baby. I wasn't thinking like, oh, he's a gifted child. I was just thinking he's really bright. But then the more and more he developed and the more that he started doing these pretty amazing intellectual things, I was like, he might be gifted. Another thing that I came across in all of my research, because you guys, when I research something, I am gung-ho, I am all in. I will read nonstop night after night after night, watch videos, like learn, read books, articles, until I feel like I have a good grasp on something. And that could be a several week, several month process. And that's what I was doing, you guys, this last couple years. That's what I have been doing, trying to better understand my son. And in that research, I thought maybe he had something called hyperlexia. And I discovered that there is someone called Dr. Trefort who has a theory. It's not actually a diagnosis that you can get, but he has a theory that there are 3 different types of hyperlexia, which is kind of the opposite of dyslexia. And hyperlexia is basically early reading. And that clearly was going on with my son. Dr. Trefort said that there were 3 different kinds of hyperlexia. The first one being just kind of standalone. That would be like your basic gifted kid that's just able to read early and has nothing else going on. Type 2 is when it is a part of the autism spectrum. And type 3 is kind of what he was theorizing is its own kind of condition, that it's not actually on the autism spectrum, because a lot of the autistic-like traits that these kids show, they later grow out of. And when that's the case, when a kid grows out of their autism traits, it wasn't actually autism to begin with. I was thinking for a long time, like when he was 2, 3, I was pretty convinced that he was like type 3 hyperlexia, because he had so many traits that seemed non-autistic to me at the time. Just the fact that he was so social, like he could have back and forth conversation with people. His eye contact was fantastic. He would engage with people, has always been a snuggler, incredibly affectionate. All of these things were making me think like it couldn't actually be autism spectrum, because an autistic kid wouldn't be doing those things. But he still had these repetitive behaviors and some like stimming behaviors, like with hand flapping and twisting and that kind of thing, jumping, that kind of thing, and his extreme rigidity with routine. So I was like, how is it that he seems like so not autistic in some ways and very much so in other ways? For a good year or 2, I was convinced that he wasn't on the spectrum, but that he had this hyperlexia type 3. That's kind of what was going on in my head. And meanwhile, of course, when you have a child who falls outside of the norm in any way, people notice, right? And so it was interesting, like the people in our lives, our friends and our family, how they perceived him. Because we had some people in our lives who all they were noticing was social deficits. Even though he was social and could have back and forth conversation, you know, there were certain kids that he wouldn't want to play with because they didn't share an interest, for example, or he would often just be off playing by himself when we played with certain kids. However, when we were with other kids, or when I got together with other friends or other certain family, they would see this other side of him where he was engaging socially and he would talk to them about his high intellectual pursuits, and they were amazed by that. They're like, wow, he is so smart. Like, he must be gifted. So it was just so interesting to me that all throughout that time, different people would see different sides of him and draw different conclusions. The friends who saw more of his rigid behaviors, times when he was being less social, those friends kind of alluded to me at the time, maybe Alex is on the autism spectrum. And when that happened, I am not going to lie, you guys, I got really offended. I got really offended. I spent a lot of time being offended because I felt like I understand my child better than anyone else does, which I do. Me and my husband do. And I felt like these people weren't seeing the full picture of what he was like. And at the time, before I fully understood what exactly the autism spectrum is, his behaviors were not fitting what autism spectrum was in my mind, which was based on a lot of stereotypes and a lot of what society still thinks of when they think of autism spectrum, like thinking Rain Man. That is a type of autism, but it's not the most common type of autism. For example, in all of the research I had done and everything, for a long time, my first gut reaction was to be offended. Then I was like, but there are these things about him, that he does have this rigidity and he does have sensory issues and these stimming behaviors and that kind of thing. And so honestly, you guys, for like 2 years, in my head, in my heart, it was just this constant battle in my mind. Like, what is going on with him? Like, I think we concluded that he is some kind of hyperlexic because he was reading so early, and we can conclude that he is very smart and likely gifted, but was he on the autism spectrum at the same time? During this time, I learned what the term twice exceptional meant, and twice exceptional basically means a gifted child who also has some sort of disability along with it. They can jump around like Alex does, and they can be very exuberant, which Alex is like. They can have social struggles, often like there is with autism, but they are stemming from something other than a neurological disorder, more because their intellectual ability is just so different than their peers that they just have a hard time connecting with their peers, so they appear to be withdrawn. So there's a lot of overlap in gifted traits and autistic traits to begin with, and I felt like the psychologist that we were seeing wasn't necessarily familiar with those nuances, and he was not familiar with hyperlexia and the different types. Anyway, if I had gone back in time, I would have gone with somebody who knew those nuances. So this psychologist did our evaluation, which involved, if you guys have ever done a neuropsychological evaluation for a child before, 50 pages of questionnaires. I counted them. It was like literally like 47, 48 pages, something like that. It was nuts, and it took me a long time to get through it. And I remember when I was filling out the questionnaires, because a lot of it is just like a number rating for this behavior, that behavior, that behavior. And I remember thinking like, I really don't know if I can like assign a number to his behavior, because in some contexts he would have this or that behavior, and in other contexts he wouldn't. And I mentioned that to the psychologist, and he said, well, just write that in the margin then. So I was like, okay. So I spent a lot of time like writing in all the nuance when I put in a score. And then it was like a parent interview, and then he met with Alex like twice, and then he did the evaluation and sent it to us like a couple weeks later. So I remember just observing. I wasn't supposed to interfere during the evaluation at all, but I was kind of observing from the next room, and I felt like a lot of the things that he was observing was pretty accurate for Alex's behavior, but some things were not at all, not even remotely close. Like, for example, he asked Alex to, draw like a vertical line, a diagonal line, and a circle. Alex was 3.5, and at the time, he was writing letters at home. And in the moment, he was not feeling in the mood to do that, so he just didn't do it. He is a very stubborn little child, and when he doesn't want to do something, he won't do it. And so he wasn't feeling like it, and he wasn't in the mood in the moment when the psychologist asked him to do that. So, he was evaluated at that time to have very poor fine motor skills. And so like when I went home that day, I asked him to do the exact same thing, and he did it, no problem. he could write the whole alphabet. And so I remember thinking, like, how accurate is this? Like, how good of a picture can you really get of a child in, you know, this very limited context, especially with somebody that the child doesn't really know very well. There's the whole like introverted, extroverted aspect of things too. You know, if you have an introverted child, you know, they may not show you their full potential because they're experiencing social anxiety. When we got the evaluation back, I was like, well, I feel like a lot of this is accurate, but there are a few things like that I'm just like, that's not accurate at all. But ultimately, the evaluation came back as Alex is on the autism spectrum. He is high functioning autism. Now, according to the DSM, which is like the Bible of psychological diagnoses. If it was the DSM-4, which was the previous version of the DSM, Alex would have gotten a diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome, but that has now just been folded into the entire umbrella of autism spectrum disorder. The subcategory for him is high functioning autism because intellectually he is average or above average, and verbally he is average or above average, whereas low functioning autism is considered to be limited verbal ability or nonverbal and limited intellectual ability, that kind of thing. So that was the diagnosis he got. I remember that was a very emotional day, and Bill and I both were not entirely sure we wanted to accept it because of all the things I had said. Felt like the psychologist didn't get a full picture of his abilities and that he didn't specialize in giftedness or autism spectrum. Those weren't his specialties. Us knowing that there were so many gifted traits that could explain some of his behaviors, we were like, let's just wait it out and see what happens in the next year or so before he goes to kindergarten. And he was starting preschool that year, so we just wanted to see how he did in preschool. So that's what we did. We had gotten this diagnosis, but basically we didn't accept it because we still weren't sure. Like, we had gone through this whole process and left feeling like we still didn't really fully have answers. And it was a very frustrating emotional roller coaster kind of process. During that time after his evaluation, I continued to research giftedness, I continued to research autism, and I continued in my head just to have this battle back and forth. You know, we knew he was gifted, but still, is he also on the autism spectrum or is he not? Just because, like I said, he would continue to have days where he seemed like maybe he was, and other days when he just like totally didn't seem like it at all. And so it wasn't until recently actually that I started learning about a lot more of the nuance of autism spectrum. I even started watching some YouTubers who are on the autistic spectrum, and I have learned so much from them, very articulate YouTubers talking about their life experience, what it's like from their perspective, what it was like getting a diagnosis later in life, that kind of thing. And it was very revealing to me. One of them was talking about how it's kind of a misconception to think of the autism spectrum as a number line. Like, over here is high functioning, over here is low functioning, and everybody is somewhere on that scale in between. That's kind of an inaccurate way to view the autism spectrum. It's more like a color wheel where each color is a different trait or symptom, what have you. And different people have different selections of these different traits that fall on that spectrum. Like, all these traits are common, but different people exhibit different ones. There's kind of the cliche saying that goes around now saying, if you've met one autistic person, you have met one autistic person. And something about that really clicked with me. I'm like, oh, thinking of it in terms of a color wheel just like totally shifted something in my head. I actually joined a group for parents of children who are on the spectrum in our local area. And I ran all this stuff by them in that Facebook group. Awesome moms, just totally awesome moms. I really felt like their feedback was non-judgmental and helpful and insightful. They were talking about that exact same thing as well, just that the spectrum, you know, is more like a color wheel than a number line. And thinking about it in that way, just really something clicked in my head that like, okay, maybe he is on the autism spectrum, because I am realizing now that I had all of these preconceived notions about what the autism spectrum is that were not necessarily accurate. that I had in my head that a child has to check every single criteria, every single box, which Alex was not checking every box. But thinking of it in terms of the color wheel, you don't have to check every box. There just has to be a certain number in any of these given categories. So it just made me realize that his struggles are not so much social and verbal and intellectual, obviously, but he exhibits more strongly like the rigidity, the repetitive behaviors, the sensory issues, that kind of thing. It was just like light bulb, like I don't know if it was a God moment or what, that was just giving me this clarity all of a sudden that I was like, I finally feel like I understand my son. I've had so much internal struggle about all this, and it just all of a sudden I felt this peace about it. I mean, it had to be a God thing, because that's how I can always tell when God is speaking to me, is when I feel peace about something. Bill and I talked it over. Previously we had been very seriously considering getting a second opinion for him by someone who was familiar with giftedness and those nuances and that kind of thing. But our insurance was not going to cover it, is what it came down to. And it's basically a several $1,000 process if you're going to pay cash out of pocket to get a neuropsychological evaluation. And I knew what was involved, that it was so intense, with 50 pages of paperwork and going in multiple times, without your kid and with your kid. And I just really didn't want to do it again. And I was just feeling like, with this epiphany that I had, I'm not sure if it's necessary for us to get a second opinion. We feel like this actually is an accurate diagnosis for him. All that is to say, the last couple months we have come to terms with it. We feel peace about it. We have accepted that our son is twice exceptional. He is twice exceptional, he is gifted, and he is also high-functioning autistic. What I hadn't realized before was that with twice exceptional kids, this is actually a common thing, that their giftedness often masks a lot of the disability that they're struggling with, and the disability can sometimes inhibit their giftedness. And so it makes so much sense now why it was so confusing to me all along. There was a little bit of time that I was beating myself up like, oh, why didn't we just accept this to begin with? Why did I spend so much time agonizing over this? But after talking with a lot of friends and family, they're really affirming to me that it wasn't that obvious. Even now, you catch Alex on a good day and nobody would even know that he was on the autism spectrum. It's just not that obvious a lot of the time. So it was definitely justified, I guess you could say, that it took us this long to get to this level of understanding of him, because it's complex, it's complicated, like most things in life and most people. People are complex. It makes so much sense now, even why we struggled for so long to even figure out what was going on with him. So yeah, now we're just feeling a lot of peace about it. And I think that that's why I am now choosing to finally make a YouTube video about it, because we have reached that point of feeling peace about it and accepting his diagnosis. And I think that's why I didn't want to talk about it for so long, because I didn't really know what to say, because I didn't know. So that is where we are at. I think it's been a really positive thing. We actually decided to get him into therapy since we have accepted his diagnosis, and we've been doing that for a couple months now. And it's been fabulous. And I have thought like, man, I wish we could have started this earlier, because it's been a really positive thing. Going to a therapist that is all she does, is working with kids on the spectrum. And I feel like she really gets him, like in ways that other professionals have not up to this point. Just understanding his twice exceptionality, that a lot of his behaviors are because of his giftedness, and some of it is because of his being on the spectrum, and that there's a lot of overlap with those things. And she thinks he's a cool kid, and I really like that. It's therapy that focuses on ultimately what the kid's strengths are. The problem with labels a lot of the time is that people use that to view what's going on psychologically with a child as a disorder, rather than as a difference. And that is something that I have really come to believe lately. I really love this term neurodiversity, because I just think that's a really good way of thinking of it, is that, some people's brains are just wired differently, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Granted, we have to be able to get everybody somewhat on the same page to function in society and that kind of thing. But the way an autistic person's brain works is not wrong. It's just different, and it's actually really amazing. And a lot of times there comes these gifts with it. Even though there are these deficits over here, there are these amazing abilities, these superpowers that come with it. And that's a beautiful thing. How boring would it be if we were all just kind of blah, you know? If everybody was average. I now think it's really awesome that we have this twice exceptional child, because it really is amazing, these abilities that he has. And at the same time, it's also very challenging. This is something I want to talk more about in future videos, is that raising a gifted and twice exceptional child is not a walk in the park. You know, everybody wants their kid to be gifted, right? But it's not as easy as it sounds. It's not this like amazing thing all the time. It's hard. It's hard a lot of the time, but so worth it. I think I'm gonna stop there. These two videos are probably gonna be two very long videos, but I just wanted to start the conversation about this. I think this is a topic that I wanna start talking about more on my channel, because it can be very isolating sometimes, and judgments are made of parents of gifted and twice exceptional kids. There's just so much to talk about. Anyway, if you guys are interested in this topic, if you have kids who are twice exceptional, or who are on the autism spectrum, or who are gifted, or anything, you know, twice exceptional can also apply to other things, not just the autism spectrum. It can be, you know, giftedness with ADHD, bipolar, OCD, anxiety, depression, any of these things that often go along with giftedness. So anyway, if that is a child in your life or yourself, or if it's just a topic that you are interested in me talking more about, definitely let me know in the comments. Tell me your stories in the comments. I really love hearing your stories and getting to know you guys a lot better. So be sure to put that in the comments and give a thumbs up if you like this video and want to see more. Thank you guys so much for watching and allowing me to open up my heart to you guys and just be vulnerable with you guys. I'm looking forward to just talking more about mental health in the future. So thanks for watching, guys. See you next time. Bye.